The definition of bullying is very broad. It encompasses a lot of different areas. I think we originally think of bullying as kids fighting each other physically, but there's so many other ways to hurt someone's feelings. And I think that's a big part of it. It's not just hurting them physically, but hurting their feelings. And that can be done by teasing, by hitting, by stealing, by calling names, which is a big thing.
If you were to compare bullying with another kind of social interaction, I think in some ways I would compare it to domestic abuse, because we're talking about repeated intentional harm with a power differential. So just as you would not ask the person who is abused to confront the person who does the abusing, you would not ask the target of bullying to necessarily confront the kid who's doing the bullying, because it's already not a fair fight.
Come here, groupie. I just want to talk to you. I don't hurt you. Why you running? Here, punk. Why you running? You ain't no real track star.
I think it's important to note that this whole concept of bullying has changed, especially within the last 10 years. Many folks who think of the whole concept of bullying think about bully turning the kid upside down and shaking their lunch money out, and taking money from their pockets. But before, bullying might have been an ordeal that you had at school from the hours of 8 to 2. And then as soon as you left at 2 o'clock, you were home, you were free, you were with your friends, you were in your house, you were with your family. Or maybe you were out playing a sport, but you only had to deal with the harassment for an hour or two, and then you went home. And so the ability to cope was much easier. Nowadays, kids go to school, they get harassed at school, they leave school, they see a text message on their phone, they get home, they go on Facebook, they see another message, and then they go somewhere else, they see Twitter, then they see Instagram, and then they see MySpace, and they have recurring images and messages, for what it feels like. And so for those kids who are consistently bombarded, they're in pain, and they're hurting, and they don't get a break from having a pain or being in hurt. If you had a toothache all day, you'd be miserable. You'd be absolutely miserable. You'd look for some Ambisol, some Tylenol or something. But for a lot of these kids, there is no Ambisol for bullying. There is no Tylenol for feeling like no one respects you, loves you, or values you, or appreciates you. And so, for me, that's the importance of trying to get people to understand the way kids feel, or how kids feel, or what may lead a child, to want to end their life, to want to end the consistent pain that they can't find to stop.
I know in my own family that a niece of mine was a victim of sort of a group of individuals. I wouldn't really call them a gang, but they all had it out for her over some very petty thing, and that she one thing they did was they wrote terrible things about her on their family vehicle. They threw eggs at the house. They put horrible things in the mailbox and made it very uncomfortable for her to go to school. She felt afraid. She thought that she would be beaten up at school. When she would see a part of that group that was bothering her in a store while she was shopping with her family, she would get very nervous and fearful and worried that something would even happen to her while she was with her own family. So it creates a lot of tension, not just among, for the entire, for a child's entire family once you find out that this might be happening to someone that you love.
If you are that afraid, if someone really has you that afraid, whether it's a real threat or not a real threat, and you just don't want to stick around and find out whether or not it's real, and you don't trust in the adults around you responding quickly enough, then at that point, I would suggest, going to a police officer or a police station, or maybe not dialing 911, but definitely going to a police station and filing a complaint or speaking to someone at the station. They welcome kids with complaints and problems and stuff, and their presence alone, even if they just showed up on the scene, their presence alone more than likely will shut that bully down.
A lot of what moves people of cross ages to violence is the inability to express oneself to someone else in words where they feel that they'll be heard, number one. But number two is a sense of how they see themselves reflected back to them in someone else's eyes. And so when they see themselves reflected back in someone else's eyes, they may feel a great deal of shame about what they see coming back at them. And that's what moves them to violence.
Wow, that's Teresa from my art class. I wish I was as talented as her.
Sure? You're not fine. You can tell us.
Why is she looking at me like I'm stupid? Do I look stupid or something? Do you know me?
Girl, you better go wash your hair. The way she looked at you. Hands up. Girl, that was think I should? Yeah, go get it. Hands up. Yeah, go get it. Hands up.
Why are you looking at me? You know me or something? Why you wanna fight me or something? Then come on. Come on, let's do this then. Come on. Wait, you wanna fight me? Do you know me? Why are you looking at me for?
You quiet? Now you want to be quiet? You're quiet, stupid.
You want to fight me?
Do nothing. What?
I'm the one.
Do something. Do something. Do something.
Are you okay, Tina? Yes. Are you sure you're all right?
I'm fine.
Okay, Teresa, I am so surprised at you. I want all three of you to get to my office right now. Okay? I mean right now. Let's go. Let's go.
It isn't anything to do with the other person, if the other person were a different way or what have you. It's really about when they see that other person, what the meaning they attribute to that other person and how that other person sees them, and that reflection back to them. It's a moment, you know, and that's why it's so important that for adults who are working with children and for parents to really hold children in a loving gaze, you know, so that they know that who they are at its core is loved and cherished.
When kids are trying to figure out what they should do with a situation, sometimes they almost try to become like the lieutenant of the kid who's doing the bullying. And all that really accomplishes is there's someone else doing the bullying and supporting the bullying. It really doesn't solve the bullying problem. And it may or may not even help that individual.
Trying to befriend a bully is like trying to speak to someone who's Chinese in English, or someone who only knows Chinese in English. They don't speak that language, they don't understand it, so you might think that by just giving in and giving them your lunch money or giving them your sneakers or giving in to their request that it's going to get better. You're only going to make it worse, because those demands, you're enabling them. You're enabling them to have this power over you by giving in. And as hard as it is, and as afraid as it is, you have to reach out and tell an adult and let the adult get the resources. Tell an adult at the school, tell an adult at home, tell an adult that may not be in either of the two, but someone you can trust.
The most important thing is that a lot of people need to be involved in stopping the problem. If that child just becomes the lieutenant, we still have bullying happening. And that's a whole other really important issue in bullying, is the role of the bystander. If 30% of kids, maybe 15 to 30% of kids are involved, that leaves at least 70% of kids who aren't. What are they doing? Those are the bystanders.
And because that person who is doing the bullying, what they need, what they want, what they expect you to do is to stand behind them and to enjoy the show, because they're putting on a show, they're putting on a spectacle, this drama that's being created. They're in a very powerful position, and the person who's being bullied is at the mercy of that powerful position. So what can you do? What is this? The easiest, most simplest thing that you can do is to disengage, to dissemble, to take away the power of the person doing the bullying. And by doing that is to simply walk away, don't pay it any mind, don't laugh, don't participate, don't jeer, don't egg them on, because it's not a situation that's healthy. It's not we want the world has a lot of problems today. We want to learn to how do we work around some of these big issues? How do we find solutions? And I think it's a way, by walking away, we're working together. We're like taking the power away from something that's bad, something that you could say is evil, and just like not giving it the time of day, just leaving it alone and going about your day. I think that would be that would put a stop to a lot of this crazy bullying business that goes on in schools, just by doing something very simple like that doesn't place you in any danger, just by not being an audience member.
The most important thing in a school-based program, and it's also important for parents to teach their children, not to just stand by. They don't have to confront the person who's doing the bullying and get in their face. That's really not even recommended anymore. But more, be a friend to that kid who's being targeted, or distract the kid who's doing the bullying, or help the targeted child tell an appropriate adult. Don't just stand there. I think it's Dante who says the hottest places in hell are reserved for in times of evil, preserve their neutrality and do nothing. Martin Luther King said the same thing, different words. We are implicated, and I'm talking about adults too, if we just stand by and let kids get hurt.
What are some signs that a child's being bullied? I think at home, parents should look for change in behavior. Maybe a child who was very expressive, who now be a little regressive, or a child is displaying aggressive behavior with their siblings when they never did that before. In the home, maybe a child who is not willing to engage in their schoolwork. They've been disconnected from school, or even more, they don't want to go to school.
I would say to a parent, if your child is suddenly getting a lot of stomach aches, a lot of headaches, faking sick to avoid having to go to school, grades are slipping, they just seem down, and there's not really an explanation, then it's time to ask some questions.
Teachers, and educators can look at, a child, again, look at the behavior. Has this child withdrawn from their schoolwork? Is this child, unwilling to participate? One of the biggest pieces that you can look at is changes in pattern. If a child was acting one way, one day, and then the next day they're acting completely different. Clearly something's happening, something's going on, and it might be the child might be suffering from bullying.
Well, I think that in terms of name calling especially, it seems to become so easy for kids to do. And, you know, really in many cases, this is what they hear at home and what they hear outside of school. And I think it's important, and I can talk more about it later, for parents to realize that if they are saying, laughing and saying, look at that fat girl, look at that fat boy, he's ugly. You know, comments like that are things that are registered by all children, whether they're small, whether they're older. And so those comments may roll off their tongues very easily, and they may not be aware of it. So they may not be aware that they are actually teasing and hurting someone's feelings. Now, you would think that that would be something that they should be aware of. And we run into it all of the time, but children need to be reminded constantly that these are not things that are appropriate and that these are things that can hurt others' feelings.
Is that because it makes you feel different? It makes you feel alone. It makes you feel separate. It makes you feel not part of the group. Now, some forms of bullying can be very tricky and hard to recognize. If you see someone who looks different than you and say something like, "You sound funny. Your voice, you know, you have a funny accent. Your hair is different than mine. Can I touch your hair? Where did you get those clothes? Are you poor?" I mean, one has to be careful of what you say to other people, because you may not even think that you're being unkind or that it may affect someone, you know, hurt someone's feelings.
There are some people who feel that bullies are born, and bullies are not born. They witness things, they see things, these kids see things, they witness things, they are brought up in certain situations that cause bullying. So if we can help them to understand that they can change their behavior and be better people and citizens, I think we're doing a good thing.
So I encourage you to become aware of the things that you say to each other, to show respect, to respect that there are differences in the world, that people are not all the same color, that people don't all sound the same, that people are not the same size, that we are all part of this thing called life together, that and that we have to be sensitive to the needs of each other. If we're not, then, you know, it's a kind of world that, you know, it becomes an unhappy place, and we want to have a little bit more ability to get along with each other. Not that we have to be best friends, because we're not always going to be best friends with everybody, but we have to learn to respect the differences of each other, to compromise, to not always have your way. It's important to hear what the other person says, to share ideas, to work together, to reason together, to make a better world together. And you can start that by making a more, you know, do something kind for someone in your class. Just say something nice to your teacher. Compliment the person sitting next to you. I mean, these are different small steps that we can take that will make our lives better, that will make our schools better, will make our streets safer, and will make this a better world, a better country, a better place to live.